Good morning and happy Friday, everybody. Back again with another installment of IFTDSS and all things fuels planning. So let's see, today, let me share my screen here since I just practiced that and I think I did it kind of right. Let's see. And while I'm doing that, Josh Hyde is on. Josh, of course, is our fabulous help IFTDSS user support and help center lead and master of all online help stuff. So he's going to be talking a little bit more further through the presentation about some of the training materials and other stuff in the help center that we have related to this topic of fuels planning and just general training stuff that we've got out there recently. And then also Patrick Johnson is going to be helping answer questions in the chat. Patrick has joined the RDNA recently within the past couple months and is now one of our leads on working with IFTDSS and developing more content and comes to us as a fuel specialist and FMO and all kinds of good stuff from the Superior. So we're really excited to have Patrick on board and being able to help us with our IFTDSS project. So anyway, with that, let me go into the little presentation mode here and I'll swap my screen around. Okay, do I have the right one up? Hopefully it is the official, my intro slide. Is that good? Everyone can see that? And I think I can, let me see if I can see the chat. Oh, I can't. Okay, I can see the chat on my other screen. So I'm going to let Josh and Patrick sort of monitor the chat for me, but I can see it. So if you need to redirect me, Josh or Patrick, please feel free to do that. And I'll hopefully, if I know how to work my screen well enough, I can find it. Okay, so a couple things. We got a couple topics to go over today. The main thing is going to be talking about these landscape editing rules and fire behavior. Actually, I might. I'll leave it on. I'm going to leave my camera on, and hopefully it'll. If anyone's having trouble, though, I might kill it here after a bit. So I want to go over a bunch of some of the stuff with editing landscapes and how that relates to obviously fuels planning and more importantly, tying it really back to fire behavior and understanding fire behavior and how when we're editing our landscapes, we're really talking about changing fire behavior. So that's going to be the focus. But in addition to that, I wanted to throw a few more tidbits out since I have everybody as a captive audience here to talk about just a few more things IFTDSS. If I can get my, there we go. So our agenda, it looks like this. I want to go quickly over what we developed this year for IFTDSS, just to remind everybody some features and things that are in the application itself that we worked on. Then we'll go over our main topic for the day, which is the editing rules and landscape editing. And then Josh is going to go over some things with an exercise and some other online help resources that tie back to the landscape editing stuff. And then also a little bit just generally on what we have for training resources in IFTDSS going into sort of our fall, winter training, fuels planning season, et cetera. And then at the very end here, I'll talk a little bit what we've got on tap for next year, which is going to be a little more limited than it has in the past, given the budget situation. Okay, so for release highlights, things we worked on this year, and if you haven't been in IFTDSS for a while, I know everybody got very busy with fire season. So if you're just getting back to the IFTDSS world and doing your fuels planning, a few things might look new to you. We've enabled the ability to upload landscape files now. And the idea with that is if you have a custom landscape and you're got something for your local area, or maybe there's a landscape that a contractor or somebody built for you, you can now load that into IFTDSS and use that for your analyses. The other good part about it is that if you are working on a project and you're going through doing some of the work we're going to talk about today, all the landscape edits and things like that, and you get a landscape all dialed in the way you like it, and you want to share it with one of the other folks on your home unit, you can now download that landscape and hand it over to your colleague or whatever, and then they can upload it, and then they can work on it from there, so they don't have to do the editing. So I think it's going to really help us. We don't have the collaboration built into IFTDSS yet. We still have that very high on our list to do. But for now, this is a little bit of a workaround anyway. It also will help if you're teaching, if you're doing any training. Landfire is redoing the way they have their product service. So when you go into IFTDSS and you draw your box to get a landscape, sometimes there's a delay and they can only serve up so many landscapes at a time. And they're working on changing that so they can handle much more capacity. But in the meantime, sometimes there's some slowdown. So if you're teaching a little workshop and you've got 5, 10 people, say, working in there, sometimes it'll bog the system down. So in this case, what you can do is build the landscape ahead of time. It comes in as a GeoTIFF file, and you can give that TIFF file to your students or your workshop folks, and then they can upload it, and then they don't have to wait for a landscape to be generated by Landfire. So anyway, that's kind of some neat things about the upload landscape file that we enabled earlier this year. So I just wanted to point that out. We also have the new Landfire versions for 2023. That's just for Alaska and the Western US. They're still working on the eastern part of the country. But as soon as that's done, we'll be able to access that. Map bookmarks, this is something we did a little while ago, but I wanted to remind folks because sometimes people forget that it's in there. So if you have set up your map in the Map Studio, you can get it all set up the way you want it. There's a little icon in the Map Studio. You click on that, you can save your map bookmark. So you can always come back to that map layout. You don't have to rebuild it every single time now, which is one of my favorite little new tools. We've got some new zoom widgets on the Map Studio, so you can click and zoom. We've got additional reference layers that we're trying to make consistent with the RMA dashboard. So if you go into the reference data set, you'll see these layers in there. And we'll keep adding stuff as new things come along. And then you can also, we enabled the fact that you can now open multiple summary reports in your browser. So they'll just pop up in individual tabs. Before you opened one report, and then if you wanted to open another report, it would replace the first one, and you couldn't compare them. A lot of times we want to compare them side by side. So now you can do that. You can open many reports at the same time and look at them next to each other. And then finally, coming out this fall, probably in the next, I don't know, probably by the end of the month, we've got to do some final testing on it. But we've done an entire overhaul of basically the code behind the user interface. So without going into all the specific technical details, which I am not an expert on, when we release that, IFTDSS is going to have a little different look and feel to it. None of the buttons are going to change. Everything's all going to be in the same place, but you'll see some subtle changes in the user interface, the font, some of the layouts in the reports will be a little more streamlined, things like that. So anyway, we needed to do that to get everything up to speed, sort of with modern day kind of technology and programming and things like that. So anyway, we'll have a release. And if you see things that look just a little different than it used to, that's why. So anyway, I wanted to point that out. Okay. Yeah, Ingo put a note there in the chat too on some of the new Landfire stuff that's available. So thanks. Yeah, anyone that has comments, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and feel free to interrupt me as we're going if we need to take a little detour. Okay, so what I want to do is get on to the main event here, which is talking about these landscape rules in IFTDSS. And we've gotten a lot of user comments and questions. Working with the Fuels Academy, this is a kind of a unit that's being developed for the Fuels Academy even further. This coming session that's coming up next year on planning and sort of NEPA and being a specialist that's contributing to NEPA documents. So what I wanted to do is talk a little more in depth about these rules, editing rules that we have in IFTDSS, and really tying that back to understanding fire behavior, and how those two things marry up so you can do fuels treatment planning. So obviously, when we're developing our prescriptions for fuels treatments, what we're ultimately trying to do is change fire behavior, and remembering that fuel models really are fire behavior, right? They're packages of algorithms that really describe fire behavior. So I know we get hung up on the vegetation part of fuel models a lot. And sometimes we spend a lot of time on that and we forget about the fire behavior part. So I really want to focus on that. So in IFTDSS, there are two ways that you can edit a landscape. We have a set of what we call default treatment rules, and I'm going to describe these in further here in a minute. And we have user created rules. So when you go into IFTDSS, you click the landscape edit, app or piece of the functionality, and then you can go and pick and choose which way you want to edit your landscape. So the first one is these default treatment rules. And you can see there's a yellow box on here that's pointing a few things out with this functionality. And we built this with Landfire. They were the ones that developed the rules. And the idea was that you could pick a disturbance type or a treatment type, and then pick a time since treatment. And it would go and use a whole set of lookup tables that were developed by Landfire using FVS, Fire Vegetation Simulator, and some of the other tools that are out there. And it would adjust the canopy characteristics and the fuel models to reflect whatever treatment you picked. And a lot of times you wouldn't know necessarily what was going on in the background, right? It was using all these lookup tables. These were developed when we first rolled IFTDSS out back in 2017 or so, and they were built only for the 2012 and the 2014 Landfire data. So here we are, right? We are now 10 to 12 years later. So that data is quite old, as you guys know. And most folks, not going to say all, but most folks want to use the most recent data, which is now 2023, last year. So these rules will not work with that data. So we've had folks going in there and using these rules for those data sets. And what I want to do is sort of recommend not using those rules right now. That's why I really want to focus on the user created rules and how to build your own rules, at least for now. We're developing new rules and working with Landfire to develop those rules. We won't have those available until next year. So in the meantime, I really want to talk about the user created rules, and let's steer away from these default rules, at least for now. We're not going to disable them in IFTDSS. We talked about doing that. We're going to leave them in there so you can still play around with them if you want, but realize that, you're working off of data that's 10 years old. So anyway, I just really want to emphasize that, and that look forward to these new rules coming up. And when we have those rolled out, we'll make a big announcement about it, and probably try to do a webinar to show people how they work. But for now, I'm going to move on to the user created rules. Okay, and this is what I kind of want to focus on. So the question we get a lot is then, okay, that's great. You want me to use these user created rules, but I don't know how. How do I build a rule to reflect a fuels treatment? So with the user created rules, you're basically deciding how you're going to change the fuel models and how you might change the canopy characteristics. And these are two separate things. A lot of people think if I change a fuel model, I'm also changing the canopy characteristics, and that's not the case. Fuel models are for surface fire spread. Canopy characteristics are for crown fire behavior. So that's why I want to point this out specifically in this webinar to get folks thinking about these two different things. I mean, they work in concert, but when you build rules and build treatments, you're doing them kind of separately. So you can apply these rules with different topographic constraints and stuff. For example, if you want to change a fuel model and you only want to do it on a north aspect, you can do that in our user created rules. And then you could apply that change just to a polygon or to your whole landscape. So you can play around in the user created rules and see what combinations of things you can do. There's a ton of help in the Help Center that will walk you through how you build these rules and why the order of the rules is important. So I'm just going to steer everybody to the Help Center. It'll take me the whole webinar to go over some of that stuff. So I don't want to spend the whole time on the rules. Anyway, so I just want to point this out that's what we're going to focus on here is changing and creating user rules. Okay, and I see Patrick's got his hand up. Patrick, do you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to say is it seems pretty intimidating to start changing rules, but you just have to dive in and do it. This is stuff that LTANs are doing consistently, and we're futzing with it and saying, oh, let's try this rule out, make that change. Oh, that didn't work out, that works great. And we just keep on batting it back and forth and coming up with something that makes sense to what the landscape is going to look like. And,
exactly.
When I first started messing with this, I was super intimidated and scared to make these changes. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to break the rule. I'm going to break the machine. It's not going to work anymore. But you can always just go back to your default rule, start over. Like it's just a process, and anyone who's going to be messing with these rules, it just takes a lot of iterations to try to come up with what's going to work across your landscape.
Exactly. Thank you, Patrick. That's a great point. I really appreciate you saying that because IFTDSS is here to learn from, right? We're not going to break anything. We're going to learn about fire behavior. We're going to learn about how these treatments affect fire behavior. And that's exactly what we want you to do. So, and you can always phone a friend, if you've got some other fuels folks that are working in this, talk to your silviculturist. I mean, there's all kinds of people you can tap into. But use IFTDSS as the place to sort of learn and noodle around and see what kind of outputs you get. And I'm going to walk through a few of these. I'm just going to do it in screen captures to try to keep this as concise as I can. Okay, so when you're editing landscapes, people always ask, like I said, how do I learn how to do this? Well, we don't really have any resources. I can't point you to a guidebook. I can't point you to a set of standards. Mostly what you're doing is developing an understanding and a thought process that's tying that landscape data, the fuel models and the canopy characteristics to fire behavior and what you're trying to get in your fuels treatment. So like in these pictures, right, we've got the picture on the far upper right, obviously that's going to produce a certain type of fire behavior. And I want to change that fire behavior. So that's really what I'm doing with my fuels treatment. And that's what I'm going to do when I write my rule in IFTDSS. So there's two things, right? Developing fuels treatments really equals changing fire behavior. And it consists of two parts. The fuel model, which is the surface fire behavior, and the canopy characteristics, which is the crown fire behavior. Okay, so that's what I'm going to walk through here. So two resources that you really need to get to know and love as you start to play around with this is obviously the 40 fuel model guide, Joe Scott and Robert Bergen's fuel model guide. And there's a lot of really great stuff at the beginning of that publication. A lot of people just flip to the fuel models, but if you take a little time and read the stuff at the front of that publication, you'll learn a lot. And then we have that compare fuel model spreadsheet, which Joe Scott developed, where it's that Excel spreadsheet. And you can, pick and choose the fuel models and change the graphs and see what the outputs are. So you can see how these fuel models compare to each other. And as a little side note, we've got a little side project going on with the folks at Northwest Nazarene University over here in Meridian next to Boise. And Dale Hamilton is, as a computer science professor, has a few students that are turning this into a web application. And we're hoping to have that working with Heather Heward at the University of Idaho to get that finished. And we're hopefully going to have something to test here soon within the next, say, month or so. But we're going to turn that Excel spreadsheet into a web app so you don't have to worry about versioning on Excel and stuff. So stay tuned. Once we have that, we'll get some folks to test that out, and we'll show you how it works. But these two tools are the primary ones I really use when I'm trying to learn and figure out how to adjust things when it comes to surface fire behavior, right? This is the surface fire behavior part. The canopy characteristics are the four that we deal with, and there's even, we can narrow it down even from there. Crown bulk density, right? That's how much volume of material is in our crowns of our forest, or our stand, or whatever we're working at. Stand height, how tall the trees are. Crown base height, what's the distance from the ground to the bottom of the closest sort of boughs on the tree. And then the canopy cover, like how much, and those are the pictures in the upper left there, how much of the sky basically can we see through the canopy? That's kind of how I think of canopy cover. So those are the four canopy characteristics that we can manipulate that are going to affect crown fire behavior and spotting and torching. So that's why these are the two pieces of the puzzle when it comes to adjusting our rules for our fuels treatment. So I think of it as two steps. The first step is validating what we have there currently. What is our pre-treatment condition, right? So we look at first surface fire behavior first. What kind of fire behavior are we getting now before we do anything? What's the flame length? What's the rate of spread? And therefore, what is the fuel model? And we can get that from the land fire data, but we need to validate it and make sure it's accurate for what we've actually got there. Then we need to look at what kind of crown fire behavior are we getting? Are we getting torching? Are we getting spotting? What's happening before we do any sort of treatment? So what are the canopy characteristics? What's causing that fire behavior? And then step two is designing your fuels treatment, right? So what do we want the fire behavior to look like after we do our treatment? What do we want the surface fire behavior to be? What do we want the flame lengths to be? What do we want the rates of spread? Same with the canopy characteristics. How do we want to change the potential crown fire behavior? Do we want to reduce torching and spotting? Generally, that's what we're after when we're doing a fuels treatment. So those are the two steps. Validating our existing condition, making sure the data within land fire is good, and then building our rules to reflect our fuels treatment. So in IFTDSS, what we're going to do is get our landscape, and this is just an example here, and you query that landscape and look to see what fuel models are in it. We can run a report, get a breakdown of fuel models, and in this case, I clicked on the polygon there, and I'm looking at a 188. So I'm like, okay, does that make sense? Does that match what I know is on the ground? And then from there, I can run some basic fire behavior to say, okay, now I know the fuel models are what those are. So what is the surface fire behavior that goes with those fuel models? What's the flame length? What's the rate of spread in my sort of existing landscape? And of course, we can do that in IFTDSS by just running our basic landscape fire behavior pixel by pixel, and we can see what that is. So on the left, we've got flame length. On the right, we have rate of spread. Then we can look at the canopy characteristics. So back to that land fire data. I turn on my canopy base height layer and I query my landscape, and I can see the four pieces of the canopy characteristics: canopy cover, stand height, canopy base height, canopy bulk density. And I'm going to focus here on canopy base height because that's the primary mechanism for torching and spotting, right? If my canopy base height is very low, and in this case it's 1 foot, that's going to allow fire to get into the trees very easily, right? So if I change that canopy base height, I could change the potential for spotting and torching. So I'm going to focus here on that particular piece of the canopy characteristics, but you can manipulate the others as well, depending on what you're after. Obviously, if you're doing a thinning project, then you're going to change the canopy cover, right? So you got to think about what your treatment is and then how that's going to change the canopy characteristics. Okay, so then from there, back to the fire behavior. For crown fire behavior, same thing. My basic fire behavior run. I click on the crown fire activity, and I can see in this slide that the orange is showing passive crown fire, right? Yellow is surface, red is active crown fire, and orange is passive, meaning torching and spotting. So this is what I'm getting before I do any sort of treatment. Okay, so now I can say, good, I'm checking the box. The stuff that I've got before, so this picture in the upper left that shows the vegetation sort of structure, and this is the fire behavior that I might get from a situation like that. And I can say, yes, that matches what is in my land fire data. So I feel good about moving forward now and building my fuels treatment. So that's what we're going to do next. So check the box. I validated my existing condition, and now I'm going to design my fuels treatment. So step 2, now I'm going to write my rules. So, but first I have to think about what my treatment objectives are, right? How do I want to change the fire behavior? In this case, there's actually a house tucked in behind those trees back there. You can't see it because of the fuels. So what I want, my objectives here are to reduce potential fire behavior around the structures and the communities. And I want to limit torching and spotting. And I really only want surface fire spread. So I want to reduce the rates of spread and the flame lengths. So if I have this before picture, we obviously want to change that to make the structures and such in that area much more defensible with our fuels treatment, right? Very typical fuels treatment type of scenario. So that's what we're after. So what am I going to do? What is my fuels treatment going to look like? Well, in order to limit torching and spotting, I'm probably going to need to limb some of these trees, right? And essentially what I'm doing is I'm changing the canopy base height. So I'm raising the canopy base height by limbing the trees. And also at the same time, by removing the shrub cover, I'm removing those ladder fuels. I'm lowering the flame length. I'm reducing the rate of spread, and I'm bringing it just down to the surface. So I'm doing 2 things, right? I'm changing the canopy base height by doing some sort of lop and scatter or whatever your fuels treatment might be. And maybe I'm roller chopping the shrubs and putting those on the ground. So now it's more of a surface model rather than a shrub model that can get into the crowns of the trees. So that's what I'm mechanically doing out there on the ground. But I need to reflect that in a rule, right? So now I'm going to go back to IFTDSS. I'm going to create my rule. So the first rule, and this is where Patrick was just saying, that's why this isn't, don't be scared to do this. All you're really doing is changing some of the things that your fuels treatment is going to kind of mimic. So I'm going to change my canopy base height in this particular fuel model. Remember, I said it was about 1 foot when I clicked on it and clicked around. And remember, our crown fire activity was in the passive. It was the orange, which is the little thumbnail there in the bottom left. So I want to change that. I don't want as much passive crown fire. I want a lot less. So I'm going to change my canopy base height. And by doing that, my rule that I'm going to write is where the fuel model is this 188 fuel model in that particular example I'm showing you. I'm going to multiply the canopy base height by 4. So it was 1 foot and I want it to be 4 feet. I want to raise it. So I'm going to multiply it by 4. So anywhere there's the 188 on the landscape, the canopy base height associated with that area is now going to be 4 feet rather than 1 feet. And you got to click around your landscape and see. It might vary across your landscape. Like I said, the surface fuel model doesn't necessarily mean the canopy base height is always 1 foot. It's just that's what was mapped by land fire in this situation. So you got to query your landscape and really understand what's there first. Okay, so that's going to be rule number 1. We're going to change our canopy base height. Rule number 2 is that shrub model, remember I wanted to reduce the flame lengths and the rates of spread. So in this case, I'm going to come up with a fuel model that's different than a shrub model, because you can see in here when I ran my fire behavior on rate of spread, that's what the legend is over here. And if you query the landscape, you'll get all the outputs, but I can see my flame length and my rate of spread is quite high. 26-foot flames, that's a little too high for us. And our spread rate's a little too fast. So we're going to need to change that fuel model. So rule number, this is where I can use the compare fuel model spreadsheet, right? I have an SH7 in there, but I really need to bring that fire behavior down. So what fuel model reflects the fire behavior that I'm after? And this might seem backwards to some people because some people want to pick the fuel model, right? But I really want you to pick the fire behavior and then go find the fuel model that matches that fire behavior, because that's really what fuel models are, right? They're just representations of fire behavior. So that's why we can use the compare fuel model spreadsheet to pick and choose and say, okay, what fuel model is really going to reflect the fire behavior that I want? So in this case, I picked a GS1, a 121, to reflect my lower flame lengths and my lower rates of spread. So when I write my rule in IFTDSS, I'm going to say anywhere on the landscape there's a 147, which is this shrub model. I'm going to change it to a 121, which is has much lower flame lengths and rates of spread. Okay, so remember what I'm trying to do here is mimic my fuels treatment. Okay, so I have two rules now. I've got one that's changed the canopy base height, and I multiplied that by 4, and I changed my shrub model to more of a grass shrub model, which is a lower fire behavior. So I'm trying to change the situation here around these structures. Remember, that was my treatment objective. Okay. So in IFTDSS, we can go back, and once we build those two rules and we hit, okay, now build me a new landscape that's going to reflect those rules. I can run a report and I can see, oh, sorry. Does someone have a comment or question?
Yeah, I got a sidebar here. So you made a comment about changing the whole landscape. So the question was, is that consistent though if I'm not treating outside this certain project area? And I think the gist of that question would be, I'm guessing they're doing contingency planning maybe, or not modified by, or modified by ask instead.
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, so you could change the whole landscape, right? Or I could just pick some polygons and say, I only want to change the fuel model within this little polygon, or within my, or maybe you do want to just change you want to change the fuel model outside of your, say it's a burn unit, right? And you want to change, you're doing some mitigation before you do a prescribed fire. And you're going to have to, because you don't want it spotting outside of the unit and causing problems. So yes. So anyway, yes, you get to decide as the button clicker, am I changing the whole thing broad scale across the whole landscape, or do I just want to do it within a polygon? And you can do that with a
change
mask.
By the uploaded shape files, right? Shape files on the mask.
Exactly.
Now that IFTDSS can upload shape files, you could potentially upload whatever alternatives you have and their associated SIL prescriptions, the rules associated with those prescriptions and what you want to achieve, and then run it through. Or like you're describing, you could run a whole mask if for some reason maybe you're changing that whole landscape, or you just want to see what is the difference. What if we did the whole landscape, right?
Exactly. Yes. And this is where it allows you to game things out. Like if we can only do this small area, this is the benefit we gain. If we do the whole landscape, if we have money for that or resources, then we gain this much more benefit, right? And that's where you can really use this tool to show those sort of trade-offs. So when we run our reports here, you can see the upper one is what I had before we did any rules, and you can see the SH7 is in there, right? And after I made my rule and my edit, I changed that fuel model SH7 and I sort of shifted it over to that GS1. So I can show everybody this is what I'm gaming out in my treatment. And then I can run the fire behavior again. So I go back into IFTDSS, I rerun the fire behavior on the left. This is the flame lengths that we had before we wrote any rules. And now this is post-treatment after I have my rules by changing my fuel model. You can see I've changed the flame lengths here, and I could do the same, look at rate of spread. And then I can also look at the effect of, this is the graph. So you can run a report in IFTDSS and show I've shifted sort of this red and orange over here on the right side in the upper graph. I've shifted it more towards the green, right? So I've increased the flame lengths in the 1 to 4 foot category, which is the green. And I shifted it out of the 11 to 25 and the 4 to 8. So everything sort of shifted to the left, which is what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to reduce fire behavior. This is just flame length. You could also look at rate of spread too. So you can use IFTDSS to show what you're doing in your, say, your NEPA report. This is the crown fire behavior. Remember, when we increase that canopy base height, you can see on the left is what we had before we wrote the rule, and on the right is what we have after we wrote the rule. So and the orange is the passive crown fire. So now you can very quickly show people, if just by limbing those trees, right, raising the canopy base height, I now have a lot less potential for torching and spotting by doing that one change. And if I couple that with removing those shrubs, then I've changed flame length and rate of spread, and I've changed the potential for crown fire. And again, you can use the charts and graphs to show this shift. At the upper one, we had the passive and the surface, and then you can see we've reduced the passive crown fire and shifted it more to a surface fire behavior, which is exactly what our objective was for our treatment. So with our rules, now we've modeled our treatment using those user created rules. We built our own rule, and our own 2 rules actually, and we changed our fuel model, and we changed our canopy base height. And now we've got something more like this, where by changing that fire behavior and changing the canopy characteristics, we now have met our objective, and you can see the house in the background now. And that's, what we were after was and now we've documented, we used our basic science and used, the best tools for the job here to show what we're up to and what we're shooting for in our fuels treatment. But the point here again is really looking at that fire behavior and writing some simple rules. These don't have to be super, complicated in order to reflect what your objectives are. And like I said, until we build some of those new rules working with land fire and stuff to mimic different treatments, I really want people to learn how to build their own rules first. That way, what's going on. It's not very black boxy, right? You're actually controlling what happens, and you're learning how these different things manipulate fire behavior, which is ultimately what we want people to learn. So I just threw a couple other examples in here. I'm not going to go through these, but you can now start thinking through your mind. If the top left is what I have before, and that's the fire behavior, and I don't want that. I really want the fire behavior to be more like what's on the bottom right. What kind of fuel model change would I make in IFTDSS in writing a rule to make that happen? Same thing here. Here's our situation on the top. I don't want that situation. I want fire behavior that's more like this on the bottom. So what am I going to do? What is my fuels treatment prescription going to look like in order to change that fire behavior? And then how would I write some rules in IFTDSS to reflect that so I can model it and then put that into some of my treatment reports and stuff? So that's really what I wanted to go over with folks, and really emphasize using those user created rules. Anybody can do this. You don't have to be, everyone can learn. This is a very accessible way to learn this stuff. And I think like Patrick said, I think it was a good point. Yes, we want you to learn and become an expert in it, but everybody needs a place to learn. And this is a great place to learn it. So we also, and I didn't go over this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say so we had the user developed, or the black box rules early on, and those only work in certain areas, and it might not work on your landscape. So going with the user created is probably going to get you a little better results in the long run. Like when I first started using this a few years ago, it wanted to convert a bunch of our clear cuts and burns over to grass models, which had super high rates of spread, but that's just not what we saw here. So I started messing with it on my own. So those rules can be a starting point, but you really want to pay attention to what's going on and not blindly just push the buttons and say, oh, they said that a thinning is going to do this to your fire behavior. You need to look at it critically before you start showing it to everyone, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And when we roll out those new rules next year, that's exactly what you're going to need to do. You're going to say, do these rules really work for my area? Are they reflecting what I want? Or should I just build my own rule? And in some cases they might work really well. In some cases they might not work that great. So, but again, understanding that coupling of fire behavior and fuels treatments and what you're trying to get will let you go in here and play around with it and really scrutinize, what's actually happening, and does that reflect what you really want? So I don't think like I said, we don't really give anybody a place to learn how to do this. So I think for now, ultimately, hopefully we can build an online course, a little bit of an online module in the learning portal to teach people and give you some exercises. Josh is going to show you a little exercise that we've had that you can practice with. In the meantime, I just wanted to really quick, and maybe we can do this in a different session, Jen, but we do have a developed treatment alternatives workflow in IFTDSS. I didn't go through it for this because I really wanted just to show the step-by-step, but you can, check out this workflow in IFTDSS. It's the same sort of steps that I just covered, but it covers it in a workflow, you know, tab by tab by tab, and it gives you some outputs that show the differences. After you run these things, it'll show the differences. It gets a little more complicated, so I wanted to stick to the basics for this one. But there's a ton of help in the IFTDSS Help Center that will walk you through how to do this. It's basically doing what I did in a little more of a sophisticated manner. So I just wanted to leave it at that. And I think what I'd like to do now, unless there's any other questions, is turn it over to Josh and let him show some learning resources and training resources that we have in IFTDSS, so you can start doing this yourself.
Thanks a lot, Cam. Yeah, I'll go over, I'll share my screen here and we'll go over some of the resources we have now and also upcoming changes. So like Kim said, we've got some IFTDSS updates scheduled for end of November, early December, so I can kind of point out where things are going to change a little bit. But we've definitely been trying to add more material into the Help Center to cover these editing processes. So from the IFTDSS homepage, we've got our Help Center here at user support. And you can get to the editing resources either through the planning cycle workflow, or I've been going up to tutorials lately and just hitting it up there. It's the same help pages in both. The tutorial section, we just have a link to some practice sessions that I'll get to here in a sec. But probably the most broadly useful pages on here, I think, it'd be the tips for editing and the user created rule guidance. So kind of our attempt at making cheat sheets for this. And the created rule guidance, that will have a lot of the material that Kim mentioned here. So just some brief explanation, and then we've got links to, for example, the fuel model comparison spreadsheet that Kim had mentioned. So we've got that down here. We've also got the GTRs on the 4D fire behavior fuel models in 13. So if you're ever looking up something for those, we've got quick references there. A couple good references on canopy features. So canopy characteristics and a stereo photo guide. And then on evaluating edits in general, we've got links to the NWCG. That's going to be fixed here in Wednesday, but links to PMS 437, and it's got a section here on landscape editing. And also got some landfire information in here as well. So tried to gather as much helpful information as we can. And then another helpful thing here is our tips for landscape editing. Got some webinars and how-tos up here, and just some helpful tips in terms of working in IFTDSS. One thing I will point out here that we've gotten a couple questions on lately is making landscape edits by aspect. So say changing a fuel model where aspects are between 90 degrees and 270 degrees. We are finding that works best when you do two separate rules for that. So one rule changing the fuel model for aspects more than 90 degrees, And then you go in and make a second rule to change fuel model for aspects less than 270, for example. And that just has to do with kind of the logic behind how the user created rules are programmed in IFTDSS. And I mentioned that because I was looking last night at some of our tutorials. So we've got some step-by-step editing tutorials here. This one's just a basic button pushing tutorial. This one's a more detailed tutorial. This has some editing walkthroughs, and it'll walk through one, a simple edit, and then two, kind of combining some of these edit rules like Kim had mentioned here. And last night I noticed that the way these are presented, putting that range of aspect here all in one rule isn't going to quite work, so we got to update that. This would actually be 2 rules down here instead of 1. So when IFTDSS updates at the end of November, beginning of December, we're going to have all these corrections here in this step-by-step tutorial. And we're also working on a new tutorial that we can add to this that goes into a little bit more detail on creating these user-created rules.
And that's where I think, Josh, our idea is, if we have the bandwidth this winter, is trying to put something up on the Wildland Fire Learning Portal that might walk you through. Maybe that's the recording here and any other resources that folks think would be helpful, putting it into a little online course and then pointing back to these references in the IFTDSS Help Center. So it's kind of all in one place. So if we have the time and resources to do that, we've been wanting to do that, sort of an IFTDSS for NEPA planning or treatment planning. We just haven't been able to pull it together just yet. So we can think about that.
Yeah, we've certainly been trying to beef up our editing resources here in the last few months as much as we can.
Yeah,
so that's
great.
Kind of the main resources I had. Is there any questions or anything else you wanted me to hone in on, Kim, before I hand it back?
I do want to, if you wouldn't mind, of going to the Learning and Development tab right there, Josh. I want to talk a minute about the workshop stuff. Oh yeah,
instructor guide or the online courses?
Let's do the online courses first, because now that the learning portal is back up and running, we have 2 online courses for IFTDSS in the learning portal. So
we do. We've got our there's a program that walks through some of the basics before using IFTDSS, but for this crowd, we've got the IFTDSS overview and using IFTDSS for prescribed fire plans courses that are probably most of use.
Yeah. And then we put on a bunch of workshops last year. I know some people helped put those on. Some of you put your own on. So we tried to gather up all the information we could. We had some detailers from NAFRI help us out. And the other tab above that, Josh, if you click on the workshop organizer, for folks who might want to put on another workshop themselves, we gathered up all that information and put it sort of into an instructor's guide or a facilitator's guide. And we're going to continue. This is sort of our first stab at just getting this information into the help center. We're going to continue to try to organize it and display it so it's easier to kind of look through. Right now, you kind of just have to scroll through it all. So we're in the next couple of weeks, we're going to try to make this a little more organized, but I think you can just kind of scroll, read through it. The workshops we did were anywhere, say, from like 10 to 20 people, and a 2-day workshop in a classroom. So we have materials that are available on the learning portal to facilitate that. So you don't have to build your own. So look through this. If you have questions, certainly let us know and we can point you to to the sources for that. And let's see,
So-
I'm seeing yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it sounds like Scott Daly's got a question
Yeah.
in terms of making some similar setups or adjustments for slope steepness.
Oh, yeah,
What are your thoughts
yep.
on that? And if you need anything else, I'll have Scott hop on and clarify.
Yeah, I'm looking. So the user created rules for changing fuel model by aspect is great. Is there or could be a similar setup? Yes, for slope. Yeah, and in IFTDSS, right, in the fuel model, or sorry, the land fire data, we have slope, aspect, and elevation, right? So any of those parameters within the topographic data, you can create a rule by you pick, what your degree or percent of slope would be, just like you would for aspect. So yes, absolutely, you could write a rule that way. So on slopes less than 30% or greater than 30%, we only want to change the fuel model by this much. Yeah.
And
You know,
and Scott, that's a great adjustment that probably does need to be made in a lot of instances, especially if you're doing like a NEPA and you're trying to evaluate alternatives and where things may or may not work and why you
Right.
need to take it to a different hillside or not. And I'll offer up too. I know your analysts, both your fire planners and your fuels planners at the regional level, they've been working on a similar methodology or process for the Washington office asks related to trying to maybe better reflect that we don't treat all 193 million acres, right? There's a lot that we can't go to for certain reasons, and trying to better express that to Congress as to the why.
Yeah.
And that's where we lean on the regional folks and your analysts to kind of give us some of that ground truth information. So you might want to reach out to them too, because they might have some like a box set of rules that they always apply for their QWRAs or their various asks that they get handed down.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I'll just add a couple follows before I hand it back to you, Kim. First on that slope question. So we actually haven't tested the slope rules in the same way that we've tested the aspect rules at our support desk yet. So I personally am not sure if that kind of rule would be something you could do all in one, or if you would need to do two separate rules. So we'd recommend maybe just finding a small spot in the landscape that you've got a couple of those different slopes on, and trying the rules both ways, and then just making sure, okay, do they both make the same edits, or is one missing pixels? Just kind of a trial and error.
Yeah, no, that's a good, how you actually write that rule, like Josh was saying, the way it's programmed in the back of IFTDSS. Always important to try the rule, go back, look at your before and after, and make sure it made the change the way you think it should have made the change. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Phil has a question. Go ahead, Phil.
Hello.
Oh, got some audio there.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you now.
We can.
Sorry about that. Good morning, good afternoon. I just want to point out and make an observation that, in terms of our effectiveness in getting IFTDSS out on the street, seems like it's been around for 15 years. For 80% of that time, it was not being adopted very quickly. I think the chief's review has accelerated that. We're starting to hear and see a lot of interest in burn planning to use IFTDSS. It's almost kind of being highly recommended, I guess, for lack of a better term. In my opinion, you guys have had the tools and the training videos and the user support to help out for many, many years. I would just say, instead of waiting for the training to come to us in multi-day workshops, let's start inspiring or encouraging the next generation of people to just learn it on their own. I think with the support that you all have, using these videos, using your customer support. So I think we're going to be able to adopt a lot more effectively and a lot more efficiently if this next generation, who is used to pushing buttons and not being afraid to break things, as Patrick said, let's get them using it without fear of breaking something and without waiting for these workshops to come to us, because I don't think we'll ever get there if we wait for Kim, who can only go one place at a time, to come to us. So use these modules. The learning portal micro lessons that you all built is a fantastic entry point, and then it's just the tip of the iceberg. You can keep rolling and rolling and rolling as far as your interest and passion allows. So, I guess to sum it up, don't wait for Kim to come to you.
Yeah.
Send your people to the modules.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks, Phil. I appreciate that. And actually, I'm going to share a slide here because that's the perfect segue into sort of our wrap up here, and a couple of things I want to point out. And Nicole also did point out in the chat on that slope rule that looks like you probably can just use one rule because slope is linear and continuous, like she's saying in the note there, whereas aspect is a circle. And, aspect, in order to write the rule, sometimes you need to do one chunk of the circle and the other chunk of the circle, whereas slope, but anyways, you still test it out, try it out, make sure it's making the change that you want it to make. That's always important. So real quick, I want to switch. Thank you, Phil, for saying that, because you actually just set me up perfectly for I'll just leave it in this. I won't put it in presentation mode. So the reality check and going into what Phil's saying for IFTDSS and going into next year. So as you all know, we're a very small team, right? It's me and Josh and Patrick. We've got Nicole helps us with some things, but she's also working on the Fire Modeling Services Framework. Patrick just came on board, but he's also got some other responsibilities. And so we're just a small team. We just don't have that many folks. And tied with that, we have 6 vacancies in the RD&A right now. And of course, as you all know, with the Forest Service budget, we're not able to fill positions currently, and we'll see how long that takes. So hopefully that'll change. But right now, that's the reality we're under. And next gen WIFTDSS is going to get rolled out next spring, sometime in March, late March, April-ish. That's coming. And so a lot of us are going to need to help that effort because obviously WIFTDSS is mandated and they also have a small team. So, just like we do on fires, right? We got to shift resources around. So my point is, back to Phil's point, is we're not going to be able to support a lot of the training like we have in the past. We'll do as much as we can. We'll keep making sure we communicate with the field and let you guys know where the training resources are. But the reality is that we're not going to be able to put workshops on. So that's why we built a lot of the materials so you guys in the field can do it yourselves. We'll certainly answer questions and help get you started. And our real plan is just to keep IFTDSS up and running. We want to keep the lights on. And if we can build some new functionality, we will. But that's really just going to depend on staffing. So I really wanted to point this out that your point is well taken, Phil, that if everybody can encourage their folks at home to grab the bull by the horns and start messing around with stuff and learning this stuff as you go, we'll continue to provide as many resources as we can. So we do have this workshop material. We found this to be quite effective for folks that are just learning. And this is our little fundamentals where you can learn some of the very, very basics if you're brand new to this stuff. This is all in the learning portal. And now that the learning portal is back online, we're going to try to clean it up a little so it's easy to find things. But we've got stuff on fuel models and spatial data, land fire, and intro to spatial modeling. And then we have some materials that you can sit down and practice. So there's exercises that you can walk through in a kind of a structured way. So if you have questions about this, please let us know, but it is available on the learning portal. And like I said, we're going to clean it up in the help center so it's real easy to find things. So that's really all I've got. Josh did mention here in the chat, we're going to get some of the links. Like I said, some of this stuff is we've got to dial it back in now that we can have access to those links. And but keep checking the help center. Shoot us a help desk ticket if you can't find something. We'll get you squared away. Yeah, anyway, let us know what we can do for you. We'll do the best we can with the resources we have on hand and keep chugging away. I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts, questions? If not, Jen, I think that's what we had for folks today. Happy to stay on for a little while if folks want to chat, on the side or have some more. I know, folks, it's the top of the hour, so I kind of wanted to let folks go here, but certainly